Shalom, shalom, everyone. This is going to be a second video uh, related to the original sin. In the first video, I showed you the perspective of original sin from the perspective of Judaism. And in this video, I want to show you the Christian perspective and how it shows no greater insight from the perspective that you find in Judaism. So let's take a listen and we will go in and out of commentary on this one.
So if you go to something like Romans chapter 5, Paul talks about, and I'm just going to use regular secular terminology, Adam messes everything up and the Christ comes and fixes it. So because of Adam, sin enters the world and death enters the world. And because of the fidelity of Jesus, then death is conquered and sin is conquered, and people are now back in a right relationship with God when they had been in this fractured relationship. Technical term for that is justification. So think about justified margins. Everything's now back in a right relationship. So what Adam broke, Jesus fixed. And that makes perfectly good sense. And then the text will go on so that by the time you get up to...
I want to back up there and let's take a second listen to what she said around the point where things are broken and Yahushua has fixed everything. So we'll back up.
Adam messes everything up and the Christ comes and fixes it. So because of Adam, sin enters the world and death enters the world. And because of the fidelity of Jesus, then death is conquered and sin is conquered, and people are now back in a right relationship with God when they had been in this fractured relationship. Technical term for that is justification. So think about justified margins. Everything's now back in a right relationship. So what...
Now that's the part I wanted to get at, because you have to be very specific when you are speaking, because when she says that because Jesus fixed everything, now people are back in a right relationship with God, it makes it sound like you're alluding to the fact that everyone on earth is now back into a right relationship with God. And that would be a lie, because your journey to salvation begins with a personal choice. And everyone on earth has not made that personal choice. And everyone on earth who says that they have made that personal choice have not sticked or continued in that personal choice. So there's a difference in the three statements. So people, Jesus fixed the issue that came out from the things that Adam and Eve did, but he didn't fix it for everyone who has yet to make a choice to gain a personal relationship with God. And then for those who believe that once saved, always saved, well, that's just a blatant lie, because when you understand the topic of original sin, you will see that it is impossible for one to be saved and always be saved, because salvation is a choice for the individual person that wants to gain a relationship with Yahuwah of the Old Testament. So I wanted to point that out. Let's continue.
Adam broke, Jesus fixed. And that makes perfectly good sense. And then the text will go on so that by the time you get up to the so-called pastoral epistles, First Timothy comes in and glosses this and said, you know what? Adam was created first and then Eve. And Adam did not sin, but Eve sinned. The woman sinned and became a transgressor. So First Timothy says, you know what? It really wasn't Adam's fault, right? As if in the background, the author is thinking, oh, when Eve ate that fruit, because she ate first, and Genesis says she ate and she gave to the man who was with her and he ate, that he realized as soon as she took that bite, oh, there goes immortality. There goes my complete relationship with the divine. And Adam, because he's such a guy, eats the fruit in solidarity with her, knowingly giving up incorruption, knowingly giving up immortality. Oh, really?
And that's another fallacy with the Christian doctrine as a whole. They look at things literal, as if Moses was writing about an actual literal tree there. And one thing you have to realize is that Moses came out of a culture that had a set of beliefs, a tradition, and I'm speaking about the Egyptians or the Kemetic people, and their doctrine was based on imagery. It was based on imagery. And so when Moses is using the tree of knowledge and fruit, he's not speaking in literal terms. He's speaking parabolically, and the problem with Christianity is that they can't seem to understand that something can be spoken in parabolic terms but be literally true. That's the problem with Christianity. And it's interesting because when it comes to Yahushua HaMashiach, they know that Yahushua HaMashiach was not a literal lamb. They know that the scriptures describe him in the Old Testament, if you will, in terms of a parabolic image. That is a lamb without spot or wrinkle. So they know that. But yet they think, oh, Adam ate a literal fruit, which is a lie. It's a complete fabrication of the truth because Christianity provides little insight into the truth because the truth was lost. Let's continue.
Right? If you read Genesis, you're not going to get that. But if you read it with that particular, you say, I can see where he gets it. So you wind up with original sin, which doesn't really get developed until Ambrose and then following him Saint Augustine, who formalizes the idea. Augustine comes up with this idea that when Adam ate the fruit, a change was wrought in his physical body, such that, to do a literal translation, his seed became vitiated. In other words, his DNA got compromised, his sperm got screwed up. And therefore, everybody inherits this taint of original sin because everybody is conceived with the semen that carries this marker, unless you're in the Roman Catholic tradition, in which case you have the Immaculate Conception, which means that when Mary was conceived, her father's sperm was straightened out. It sounds better if you do it in Latin.
That's another fallacy. And when I do the video that I'm going to do on the original sin, you're going to see that it has very little to do with Adam's sperm. I'm going to make the connection and I'm going to show you how death passed on from Adam and the woman to the next generation. And it's not going to be because of Adam's sperm. We're talking about death here.
So, and it makes sense. It's a logical reading. And original sin actually makes sense to me because it seems to me that human beings are hardwired towards selfishness. We're hardwired toward not necessarily loving our neighbor as we would love ourselves. We're certainly not very good at loving the stranger. let alone, as Jesus would put it, loving the enemy. And there are a lot of things we do that strike me as not quite in line with what the divine would have intended. So the idea of original sin makes a great deal of sense. But the Jewish tradition does not go there. When we read Genesis 3, which is the so-called fall narrative, the word fall is not used. The word sin is not used because sin doesn't enter the vocabulary of the Bible until Cain and Abel in the next chapter. So what happens with the Jewish tradition is, instead of getting this original sin where there's an irreparable breach between God and humanity that only Jesus can fix, we note that when Adam and Eve leave Eden, God goes with them, and God is always with the people, and there's no irreparable breach. And then the Jewish tradition then has various ways of understanding how what happened with Adam and Eve impacts us.
So let me pick up on that, because in a sense, original sin and the term, which you put in quotation marks, fall of man, is definitely not part of the Jewish view of Genesis chapters 2 and 3. But if I were to read the following verse to many of my Jewish friends and ask them to identify it, I would probably trick them. That is Psalm 51, verse 5. In the Hebrew version, it's Psalm 51, verse 7. Indeed, I was born guilty, a sinner, when my mother conceived me. Now, please note, that is original sin. That person is saying, and this is not a mistranslation, I was born with sin. So in some sense, the notion of original sin is very much part of the Hebrew Bible. But if you were to press me, I would not be able to find many other verses which agree with that verse from Psalm 51. It is a minority opinion within the Hebrew Bible, or expressed only very rarely within the Hebrew Bible. You have some similar notions. For example, when God is about to destroy people with the flood of Noah, God says that people's evil inclinations are bad all the time and so forth. So you have a handful, maybe 2 hands full of texts that express that. But this is a wonderful case, and we show a lot of other cases like this in the Bible with and without Jesus, where a notion that is a peripheral notion within the Hebrew Bible, for whatever sets of reasons, is picked up in the early Christian community, sometimes in the New Testament, or sometimes, as AJ just noted, in the New Testament, or a little bit later in the early church fathers, and becomes magnified and magnified. So another way of putting this idea is that, yeah, in some way, Jews and Christians really do share the notion of original sin. But in the Hebrew Bible, it is a minority notion. It is not part of the Eden narrative. While in the Christian tradition, it eventually becomes a majority notion and becomes very, very central to Christian faith and belief in a way in which it does not in Judaism. The material shared and places where we differ.
Hey, thank you so much for checking out this video clip from the Dogado podcast. To get more.
So that's it. You see both views. If you looked at the last video, original sin, the failed perspective of Judaism, and this video, the original sin, I forgot what I was titling it, but you'll see it once the video drops. You'll see that both parties have 2 different understandings of what the original sin is, and yet I'm going to introduce a third so that you can actually see what the original sin is and how death passed from one generation to the next generation. And then maybe we will discuss the topic that Paul discusses in his writings in the book of Romans, how he was once alive, but then when the Lord came, the Lord took opportunity and he died. And so we'll talk, we may touch on that a bit as well. But shalom, and I'll see you at the next video.